Okay, this week is chapter 3, and we want to get into some of the people that put anthropology together in its current state. Anthropologists are cultural anthropologists are typically people that kind of split things apart. And what so early in the 20th century, where they were kind of godlike single people that started important traditions in cultural anthropology, some of which are covered in your textbook, some of them which are not. We may we may examine some of the ones that are not, but basically the textbook gets the important ones. And what I'd like for you to take a look at is how these people are different from each other, and what that means, and what their traditions that they started that still live on now in living anthropologists, how they affected those those people now a century later. Of course, the culture hero of American anthropology is Franz Boas, and he has his roots in the 1800s in Germany and very sophisticated education in Germany. And since he was Jewish, he eventually fled Europe, found the Americas to be a more welcoming environment. And one of the great things that he accomplished was essentially turning academic anthropology, not only turning it on, but turning it away from the prevalent racism that pretty much governed thinking at the time. But and he did a few things, in terms of anthropological research. Like he established cultural relativism and pretty much participated in getting the idea going that culture is what anthropology is about, as opposed to, as your textbook explains, sociology for society for sociology. There are some people that kind of divides up into continental things in a way, but there are, as in America and Europe, there was a person named Bronislaw Malinowski. Curiously enough, grew up in Poland, but managed to become one of the great writers and anthropologists of all time. His orientation was toward how individual people used culture to to facilitate their survival and well-being. And then on the other side of the Great Water is Radcliffe Brown, and he didn't like the idea of focusing on the individual very much. He liked more focusing on institutions, and he took his lead from a Frenchman named Emile Durkheim, and they developed a branch of cultural anthropology that's referred to as structural functionalism, dysfunctionalism. The outcome of this was that you have, at the beginning, this separation into kind of two different points of view on what anthropology was about, and And that also became a tradition. I think if you go to the American Anthropological Association website, well, you'll find that there are, you know, 100 or 200 separate interest groups uh, in anthropology. These are formalized different ideas about how anthropology ought to be done and what its uses are and everything. And that's certainly proven to be the case. As every man is a statue and his own hero, sort of. Every man and woman. About half the anthropologists are women now. And so Malinowski established really in a very interesting and rigorous way what Boas thought was the important thing, which was to go and live with a group of people for a while, long enough so that you can really get to know them and get to know what the inside story about their belief systems is. Interestingly enough, this kind of happened by accident because he happened to be doing his field work in the Trobriand Islands when World War II broke out, or World War I broke out, and so he was, a member of Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he just had his feet nailed to the ground in the Trobriand Islands, but worse things could happen to you. He wrote a great book, Argonauts of the Pacific, about how the culture of the Trobriand Islands functioned, and it was still one of the most read books in the anthropological discipline. But Radcliffe Brown, he went off. He's an Englishman, and he's kind of a creature of the British Empire. And he focused more on these institutional things, and he really gets his inspiration from Emil Durkheim. And Durkheim was somebody who was focused on kind of the broader perspectives on things. And there's something that had been going on in the 1800s that is referred to as the invisible hand. The invisible hand is the idea that things seem to happen in societies that are different from what you would anticipate from just the individuals in the society. And actually, anthropology and much more than anthropology are still struggling with this thing. But in recent times, in a set of thinking called complex systems theory, it's come to be realized that these things are as obscure and nebulous as they seem. It's a real part of human society, and you can think of it as the usual starting point in trying to explain what the emergent conditions, they call them, or the invisible hand, is like in a mob scene where mobs start out as just a mass of people, but somehow magically the whole thing turns into the whole crowd picking and following one leader. And there's still a lot of head scratching over this sort of thing, but it's very clear that it does happen, and it happens at all kinds of levels of society, and you just have to come to terms with it if you're going to study social institutions and the like. So in the early 1800s, you had these two, basically two seminal figures, and they had followers, some of which turned into people like the structural or the functionalists like Malinowski gave rise to people like Margaret Mead, some of the great writers of anthropological history, and others followed in the path of the structural functionalists. Then, curiously enough, at least in Europe, along came a person who was not always creating new things, but he was trying to figure out how to put things back together, put the anthropological Humpty Dumpty back together again. His name is Max Weber, and he tried to look at both the individualistic and the institutional perspectives on societies and human beings in the anthropological way of doing it. So we'll kind of focus at that level of the early 20th century this week, and then move into more particulars next week.